You've heard children's laughter echoing through empty halls, a sound that once brought comfort. But what if I told you there are children who don't laugh at all? Children who don't blink or speak. They simply watch. And when they do, something far darker stares back at you. Imagine walking through a quiet street as the sun sets, thinking the night brings peace. But then you see them, a child standing alone, their eyes black as midnight. No expression, no soul behind them, just darkness. They say it's the eyes that hold the power. And once they lock with yours, there's no turning back. This is the terrifying encounter of a black-eyed child, and it happened when the sun went down. It was late in the evening, the kind of night where the air feels thick, heavy with something unspoken. The wind howled through the trees, rattling branches like the bones of forgotten souls. A storm was closing in, dark clouds swirling ominously above, blocking out the last of the setting sun. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to break the stillness. In the midst of this oppressive calm stood Mark, a seasoned urban explorer known for seeking out the forgotten places most people dared not visit. He had heard the rumors about the old house on the edge of town, but rumors were just that, stories, often exaggerated, sometimes fabricated. So when he stood at the threshold, flashlight in hand, the wind biting at his skin, he wasn't prepared for the feeling that crept up on him. The house loomed ahead, its windows dark and lifeless, and yet something about it seemed off. Mark hesitated for a moment, his heart quickening, a sense of unease pulling at him from all directions. His footsteps echoed as he crossed the decaying porch, the wood beneath his boots groaning under the weight of his presence. He glanced around, half expecting someone, or something, to be watching from the shadows. But it was quiet, too quiet, almost as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to cross the threshold. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he reached for the handle, the cold metal sending a shiver through his fingers. This was supposed to be an adventure, just another forgotten place to explore. But as the door creaked open, Mark could feel it, the undeniable sense that he was not alone. Mark stepped inside, the door creaking loudly behind him as it shut with an unsettling finality. His flashlight cut through the dust-filled air, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The silence inside the house was deafening, as though the very building itself had been abandoned by sound. It felt as though every creak of the floorboards beneath his boots was amplified, each step heavier than the last. His heart began to beat louder in his chest, a steady rhythm that seemed out of place in the stillness. He scanned the room, his light dancing across the peeling wallpaper and broken furniture that lay forgotten and decaying. The house felt wrong, but he pressed on, a mixture of curiosity and a stubborn sense of adventure pushing him deeper into the heart of the place. As he made his way into the living room, a faint shuffle broke the oppressive silence. Mark stopped in his tracks, the hairs on his arms standing at attention. He spun around, the beam of his flashlight jerking erratically as it landed on the staircase. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, his mind playing games. But then he saw it, a figure, standing motionless at the foot of the stairs. A child. But there was something wrong. This was no ordinary child. Mark's breath caught in his throat as the flashlight beam caught their face. Their eyes black. Not dark, not shadowed. Black as if there was no light at all, no reflection, no soul behind them. Their pupils swallowed the light, leaving only endless darkness. No expression, no emotion, just emptiness. Mark stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears, his mind racing for an explanation. His first instinct was to call out, to ask if the child needed help, but the words caught in his throat, trapped by an overwhelming sense of unease. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared, its eyes locked on his, like a silent sentinel waiting. His flashlight flickered, casting the room in brief, violent bursts of light. With each pulse, the child seemed to grow even more unsettling, more unnatural. It didn't make a sound. Not a shuffle, not a whisper. It just stood there. Mark's throat went dry, his heart hammering in his chest. He tried to back away, but his legs felt as though they had turned to stone. Was this real? Was this some trick of the light, some twisted hallucination? His breath came in shallow gasps as he raised the beam of his flashlight, pointing it at the child's eyes, expecting some reaction, a blink, a shift. But there was nothing, only the endless, hollow gaze that made his stomach churn. And then something changed. A slight movement, just a flicker, too fast to be certain, but Mark swore he saw the child's head tilt ever so slightly, as if studying him. It was small, but it felt like the moment before something terrible was about to unfold. Mark's body froze as the air around him seemed to grow even colder. The silence deepened, pressing in on him like a heavy weight. His mind screamed for him to turn and run, but his feet felt heavy, like they were glued to the floor. Was this really happening? Was this just his mind, playing tricks in the dark? But when he looked back at the child, there was no mistaking it. The child's eyes, those eyes followed him. Every movement he made, every breath he took, it felt like they were watching, waiting for something. For him to make a move, for him to react. And Mark had no idea what it wanted, or what it would do if he did. As Mark stood frozen in place, the air around him seemed to shift. The house, once oppressive with silence, now felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the broken windows, sent waves of unease through his body. The child, still standing motionless, felt like a shadow cast over his very soul. The unsettling feeling crept into every corner of the room, the darkness pressing in around him, thickening like a storm cloud. Mark's instincts screamed at him to move, to run, yet his body betrayed him. His legs felt like lead, his feet glued to the floor. He couldn't take his eyes off the child. And the child's gaze, it never wavered. The black eyes seemed to reach deep inside of him, digging beneath his skin, touching places no one had ever dared to tread. The silence was broken only by the sound of his own rapid breathing. With each exhale, the air seemed to grow colder, sharper. The flashlight in his hand flickered once more, casting the child's image in strange, jagged light. For a moment, Mark thought he saw the faintest movement in the child's posture, but it was gone in an instant, too quick to be certain. Suddenly, there was a whisper, barely audible at first. Mark's heart stopped. The words were clear, yet somehow distant, as if spoken from the very walls around him. "Let me in." Mark's blood ran cold. The words didn't make sense. The child hadn't moved, hadn't even opened its mouth, yet the voice had come from nowhere and everywhere at once, wrapping itself around him like a cold vice. The child's eyes glimmered in the dim light, a darkness that felt ancient, unyielding, unforgiving. Mark's pulse quickened as his breath hitched in his throat. There was no way this was real. No way that a child, standing in a decaying house in the middle of nowhere, could speak without moving its lips. And yet, there it was. Mark's hand trembled, and the flashlight beam wavered with the nervous flick of his wrist. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, stifled by an overwhelming sense of dread. His thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Was this some kind of twisted prank? A figment of his mind playing tricks? But then he heard it again. "Let me in." This time, the voice was clearer, more insistent. Mark's stomach churned, his legs giving way as the cold sweat ran down his back. Something in the air had shifted. The atmosphere was charged, thick with an unseen presence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The child's eyes never left him, empty, hollow, and black as the void. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't move. Instead, he took an involuntary step forward, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. The child's presence seemed to pull him closer, each step feeling like a step toward an inevitable, unknowable fate. Mark reached the base of the stairs, and his breath caught as a sudden gust of wind tore through the broken windows, extinguishing his flashlight. The room plunged into darkness. The child, however, remained unmoving. The only sound now was Mark's shallow breath, the pounding of his heart, and the silence that threatened to suffocate him. And then another whisper, a soft, yet deliberate command. "Come closer." The hair on Mark's neck stood on end. He couldn't tell whether the voice was coming from the child or from somewhere deeper within the house. A distant echo, a faint echo, but it was unmistakable. The house creaked again, louder this time, the walls groaning as if the very foundations were shifting. Mark took another step, despite his every instinct warning him to flee. What was happening? Was this real? He couldn't escape the grip of that gaze. The darkness in those eyes felt as if it had followed him for years, just waiting for this moment. Waiting for him to step into the unknown. And as his feet carried him forward, he began to hear another sound, a soft tapping, like fingers on the wood. But there was no one else in the room. Only him. And the child. Mark's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, his chest heaving as he struggled to steady himself in the pitch-black room. The faint whisper of the child's voice was still echoing in his mind, "Come closer." And though every part of him screamed to run, to flee, his feet moved forward against his will. He was no longer in control. It was as if the house had a pull on him, a force he couldn't resist. The cold air intensified, the temperature dropping so quickly that his teeth began to chatter. But it wasn't just the cold. It was the oppressive weight of the darkness, the suffocating presence of something unseen, but undeniably there. Mark's heart pounded harder in his chest, and for a moment, he thought he might pass out. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but there were no answers. Just questions. As his eyes adjusted to the dark, the faint outline of the child became clearer. The black eyes still stared at him, unblinking, unwavering. They were filled with something far darker than a simple emptiness. The more he looked, the more those eyes seemed to pull him in, drawing him into the abyss. The room grew colder, the shadows around him deepening, until it felt as though the walls were closing in. He had to get out, but it was too late. Suddenly, a cold, clammy hand gripped his ankle. Mark stumbled, nearly falling, but he couldn't look away from the child. He could feel the child's presence closing in, the air thick with something otherworldly, something ancient. His breath quickened, and panic surged in his chest. Without thinking, he pulled himself free and ran, his legs pumping, his feet slipping on the dusty floorboards. The house seemed to stretch out endlessly, as though the hallway had become a maze of darkness. He reached the door, the exit, and shoved it open with all his strength. But before he could step outside, the room seemed to change. The air turned heavier, thicker, and just as he was about to cross the threshold, a sharp pain shot through his ankle. Something yanked him back, and he turned in horror to see the child, standing right behind him. The black eyes locked with his. Cold. Empty. And then the child spoke again, its voice a soft, almost mocking whisper. "You can't leave." Mark's stomach churned, his skin crawling with a terror so deep, it felt like it had come from somewhere inside him. The child was closer now, so close he could feel the icy breath on the back of his neck. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut on its own, trapping him inside. The child's voice, low and calm, continued to echo in his mind, filling the room with an oppressive, suffocating presence. "Let me in." The walls seemed to close in tighter, the air thicker, and the world itself felt like it was folding in on him. The sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, began to grow louder, coming from all directions. And then, the chilling realization hit him like a brick to the chest. He was no longer alone in the house. Something else was there. Something far worse. He turned around, his eyes scanning frantically for an escape, but there was no way out. Only darkness. The child's whisper filled the air, louder now, like a chant. "You belong to me." In that instant, Mark felt it, the grip on his soul. It wasn't just the child. It wasn't just a haunted house. It was something deeper, something older, that had been waiting for him. Waiting for someone like him to walk into its grasp. The child's black eyes seemed to burn into him, as though they were reaching into his very being. He felt as if the room was swallowing him whole, and his body trembled uncontrollably. His vision blurred as the darkness closed in. He could feel his consciousness slipping away, his body frozen in fear, unable to fight, unable to scream. The last thing he saw before everything went black were those eyes, watching him, waiting. When the police arrived, they found the house as it had always been, silent, still, and untouched by time. The door Mark had so desperately tried to escape through, wide open, no sign of struggle, no footprints in the dust, no child, not a trace of the horror Mark had experienced, except for the sheer terror that had gripped him in his final moments. They searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, every corner, but found nothing. Not even the child. The only thing they found was his flashlight, still lying on the floor near the doorway, its beam still flickering weakly, casting an eerie glow across the dusty floorboards. Mark was gone. The only evidence left behind was a single message on his phone, a cryptic, chilling text sent just moments before he vanished. It was the eyes. The eyes are everywhere. And now it's my turn. Help me. The officers, baffled and unnerved, found no trace of Mark anywhere near the house. No sign of where he could have gone. No explanation. Just an empty house, the remains of a broken man, and a mystery that would remain unsolved. Some say Mark was just another victim of the black-eyed children, the ones who've been whispered about for years. But the thing is, no one really knows what happened to him that night. Did Mark encounter something from another world? Or was it all just a figment of his mind, unraveling in the darkness of that house? There are whispers, though. Whispers that the child is still out there, waiting, watching. And now, some believe that Mark didn't just disappear. He was taken, drawn into the darkness of those empty, black eyes. And what's worse, the child is still waiting for someone else to open the door. What do you think? Was Mark's encounter with the black-eyed child simply a hallucination, a trick of his mind in the darkness? Or did he truly meet something far darker, something that should never have crossed his path? If you believe in the supernatural, or if you've experienced something you can't explain, we want to hear from you. Have you had an encounter with something unnatural, something that watched you from the shadows? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments below. And if you think you've never seen a black-eyed child, well, maybe you've just never been in the right place at the right time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling tale like this. Who knows what could be waiting for you in the shadows next time?